The Orphan's Puzzle. The research station Kepler's eye hung in the silence between stars, a silver needle threading the darkness of deep space. Inside its cramped observation deck, Dr. Isahn pressed her six-fingered hands against the viewport, watching the distant nebula paint colors that had no names in any language she knew. She was alone. Not just now in this moment but truly alone. The last of her kind. The Veltruum had been scholars, philosophers, mathematicians who had spent millennia mapping the cosmos. Then the plague came, swift, merciless, absolute. Isahn survived only because she'd been here light years from home when her world died. That was 4 years ago. The other species of the Galactic Assembly had been kind. They'd offered condolences, granted her continued access to the research station, even assigned her a generous stipend. But kindness wasn't kinship. Sympathy wasn't belonging. She was a living fossil, the final page of a book no one else could read. Isahn turned from the viewport and returned to her workstation, where holographic equations floated in the air like luminescent butterflies. She was close, so close, to solving the recursive convergence problem, a mathematical puzzle that had stumped the galaxy's finest minds for 3 generations. It would be her gift to the universe, proof that the Veltruum had existed, had mattered. Her 6 fingers danced through the equations, adjusting variables, testing theorems. The math was beautiful, elegant, almost musical. But there was something missing, some connection she couldn't quite. The comm system chirped. Isahn hesitated. She rarely received calls anymore. Most species had learned that she preferred solitude to pity. Dr. Isahn? The voice was strange, flat vowels, clipped consonants, nothing like the melodious tones of the Veltruum or the harmonic chords of the assembly species. This is Captain Sarah Chin of the human vessel Wandering Star. We received your published work on recursive mathematics. May we dock? Humans. Isahn had heard of them, the newcomers, the strange bipeds from a world they called Earth. They'd only joined the assembly 5 years ago, were still considered primitive by most standards. Their ships were crude, their technology unsophisticated, their lifespans tragically brief. Why would they contact her? Yes, Isahn said finally. Docking Bay 7. 20 minutes later, Captain Chin floated through the airlock. She was small by galactic standards, with dark hair bound tightly at her neck and eyes that seemed too large for her face. Behind her came 2 others, a tall man with skin like polished copper and a young woman whose nervous smile revealed flat, white teeth. Dr. Isahn. Chin extended her hand in the human gesture of greeting. Thank you for seeing us. This is Lieutenant Marcus Webb and Specialist Amy Park. Isahn touched Chen's hand briefly, confused by the warmth of human skin. Most species wore environmental suits, but humans seemed comfortable in the station's standard atmosphere. Your paper on recursive convergence, Chin continued, pulling a small data tablet from her suit. It's remarkable. But we believe we might have something that could help. Help? Isahn's crest flattened in skepticism. The recursive convergence problem has remained unsolved for 73 years. The crystalline minds of Vex Prime declared it potentially impossible. Yes, ma'am, Lieutenant Webb said, his voice gentle. But we humans have a saying, sometimes you're too close to see the picture. Specialist Park stepped forward, her hands moving nervously. On Earth we have something called gift exchanges. When someone is working hard on something important, especially when they're alone, we bring them something to help. Not because we're smarter but because sometimes a fresh perspective, even from someone less advanced, can illuminate what was hidden. Isahn felt something strange flutter in her chest cavity. You came all this way, to give me a gift? Not just any gift, Chin said, her eyes brightening. Amy here isn't a mathematician like you, Dr. Isahn. She's a musician. And when she saw your equations she said they looked like something she recognized. Park activated her own tablet, and suddenly the observation deck filled with sound, strange, rhythmic, mathematical in its patterns yet emotional in its execution. Human music. This is called a fugue, Park explained. Multiple voices each following the same theme but offset, recursive, building on each other. When I saw your convergence equations I thought, what if they're not meant to resolve? What if they're meant to harmonize? Isahn stared at the floating equations, then at the visualization of the music. The patterns overlapped, intersected, created something that was neither math nor melody but somehow both. Her hands began to move. She pulled her equations into the same display space as the musical notation, adjusting, aligning, seeing for the first time that she'd been trying to force convergence when the answer was in sustained resonance. The variables didn't need to collapse into a single solution. They needed to support each other like voices in harmony. The mathematics bloomed. For 17 hours, Isahn worked while the three humans watched in silence, occasionally offering observations, never claiming expertise, simply sharing what they saw. When she finally solved it, when the proof assembled itself into something beautiful and complete and true, Isahn turned to find Captain Chen smiling with tears in her eyes. "Why?" Isahn whispered. "Why would you do this for me?" Chen's smile softened. "Because no one should be alone when they're creating something beautiful. And because..." She hesitated. "Because gifts aren't about being worthy or advanced or qualified. They're about seeing someone and saying, 'You matter. Your work matters. We're here.'" Isahn felt her crest rise, felt something break open inside her chest that had been sealed since her world died. She wasn't just the last Veltrum anymore. She was seen. The weight of memory. The celebration in the observation deck was quiet, almost reverent. Lieutenant Webb had produced a container of something he called tea, a human beverage made from dried leaves and hot water. Isahn found it bitter but strangely comforting, warming her from the inside in a way the station's recycled air never could. "The Assembly Council will want to verify the proof," Isahn said, cradling the warm cup in her 6 fingers. "But the mathematics are sound." 73 years, and the answer was in resonance, not resolution. "Sometimes the hardest part is knowing which question to ask," Specialist Park said softly. She sat cross-legged on the deck floor, a pose that seemed impossible for her rigid human skeleton but which she maintained with ease. "My music teacher used to say that too. We'd spend weeks trying to make a piece perfect, when really we just needed to let it breathe." Captain Chin stood at the viewport, gazing at the nebula beyond. "Dr. Isahn, may I ask you something personal?" Isahn's crest rippled, uncertainty mixed with curiosity. In the 4 years since the plague, no one had asked her anything truly personal. They asked about her work, her needs, her preferences for station temperature. But never about her. "Yes," she said. "What was Veltruma like?" Chin turned from the window, her dark eyes reflecting starlight. "Your homeworld. What do you miss most?" The question struck like a physical blow. Isahn's hands trembled, nearly spilling the tea. For 4 years she had buried her grief beneath mathematics, hidden her loss inside equations. No one asked about Veltruma. The other species were too uncomfortable with death on such a scale, too frightened that their own worlds might face similar fates. Isahn's voice failed. She tried again. The morning chimes. Every dawn, the crystal formations in the Silenthia Mountains would catch the first light and ring. The entire planet would wake to music. Park's eyes widened. "Your whole planet sang at sunrise?" "Yes." The memory flooded back, so vivid it hurt. "And the libraries. We had a tradition. When a Veltruum made a discovery, we would carve it into living stone. The knowledge would grow, branch, become part of the bedrock itself. 10,000 years of mathematics, growing like trees." "Gone now," Webb said quietly. It wasn't a question. Gone. Isahn's crest flattened completely. The plague moved through the population in 16 days. By the time I received word, by the time I could even attempt to reach home, there was no one left to. She couldn't finish. 4 years of carefully maintained composure cracked. Her chest heaved with the Veltruum expression of grief, a silent shuddering that had no tears, only the weight of loss pressing down until breathing became difficult. Captain Chin knelt beside her. Slowly, carefully, she placed her hand on Isahn's arm. The touch was warm, solid, present. "I'm sorry," Chin said. "I'm so deeply sorry." "Everyone is sorry," Isahn whispered. The crystalline minds composed symphonies of condolence. The Thoraxians granted me honorary citizenship. The council erected a memorial. But sorry doesn't. She struggled for words in galactic common, a language that had never been designed for this depth of pain. "Sorry doesn't bring them back. Sorry doesn't mean I'm not alone." "No," Chin agreed quietly. "It doesn't." Something in her tone made Isahn look up. The captain's face was composed, but there was something ancient in her eyes, something that understood. "Humans have a history of extinction events too," Webb said, settling onto the floor beside Park. "Not like yours, we were lucky. But there were moments when we came close. Wars, plagues, disasters. And we have ethnic groups, cultures, languages that vanished completely. Last speakers of dying tongues. Final practitioners of ancient arts. We understand something about being last," Park added. "About carrying memories that no one else shares." Isahn's crest rose slightly, confusion threading through grief. "But there are billions of humans. You have each other." "Yes," Chin said. And that's why we're here. She stood and walked to her equipment pack, withdrawing something wrapped in soft cloth. When she unfolded it, Isahn saw a device, clearly human-made, with their characteristic combination of elegant design and practical durability. This is a memory archive, Chen explained, holding it gently. We designed it specifically for you. It's encoded with quantum crystalline storage, technology we learned from the Thoraxians but adapted with our own methods. It can hold, well, essentially unlimited data. I don't understand, Isahn said. Park leaned forward, her voice eager but gentle. Tell us about Veltruma. Everything. The morning chimes, the living libraries, the way your people celebrated discoveries or mourned losses. Your music, your mathematics, your poetry, your jokes. The taste of your food, the smell of your air, the feel of your home soil. We'll record it all, Webb continued. Not just as data but as story. The way you experienced it, the way it mattered. And then we'll share it. Share it. Isahn's hands clutched the cooling tea. Chen nodded. Humanity has something called the Memory Keepers Project. When we learned about the plague, about the Veltrum being lost, we started it. We preserve the stories of extinct civilizations, not just facts but the feeling of them. We teach them in our schools, compose music inspired by them, create art that honors them. Your people won't be forgotten, Park said, and there were tears on her cheeks now running freely. Not while humans exist. We'll carry the Veltrum forward. Your morning chimes will ring in human compositions. Your mathematics will be taught to human children. Your story will be ours to protect. Isahn stared at the device, at these three strange beings from a primitive world, and felt something impossible bloom in her chest. Oh, why? The question came out broken. Why would you do this? You barely knew we existed. Captain Chen's smile was sad and beautiful. Because someone has to. Because stories matter. Because no civilization, no matter how advanced or primitive, should vanish as if it never existed. She paused, then added softly, and because you're not just the last Veltrum, Dr. Isahn. You're also the first guardian of their memory. But you don't have to be the only guardian. We're here, Webb said simply. We're listening, Park added. Isahn looked at each of them, these humans with their short lives and crude ships and impossible compassion. They had solved her mathematical problem not with superior intelligence but with unexpected perspective. Now they offered something far more precious, to ensure that her people's existence would echo beyond her own life. She set down the tea and touched the memory archive with one trembling finger. The morning chimes, she began, her voice steadying. They started in the eastern peaks, where dawn came first. The crystal formations were natural, but my ancestors shaped them over generations, tuning them I think you would say, like instruments. Captain Chen activated the recording device. Specialist Park pulled out her tablet, ready to capture musical notations. Lieutenant Webb simply sat, listening with the kind of attention that honored the dead by remembering them fully. And for the first time in 4 years, Isahn spoke of home. Not to equations or memorial stones or sympathetic strangers who would forget by morning, but to beings who had crossed stars to say, your story matters. We will remember. The Garden of Voices. 3 days passed like water through open fingers. Isahn spoke until her voice grew hoarse, until the memories she'd locked away came flooding out in torrents of color and sound and sensation. The humans listened, truly listened, with a patience that defied their species' reputation for restlessness. Park translated Veltrum musical notation into human composition, her fingers dancing across her tablet as she captured harmonies that hadn't been heard in 4 years. Webb documented agricultural practices, architectural principles, the way Veltrum children learned mathematics through games played with stones and starlight. Chen recorded everything, occasionally asking questions that somehow drew out details Isahn hadn't known she remembered. We had a festival, Isahn said on the third evening, exhaustion making her words soft. Every 100 years when the twin moons aligned. We called it the resonance, 3 days when every Veltrum would stop their work and simply share. You would walk through the cities and hear mathematics being sung, see dancers performing proofs, taste food prepared using molecular gastronomy so precise it was indistinguishable from art. It sounds beautiful, Park whispered. It was. Isahn's crest drooped. The last one was 16 years before the plague. I attended with my research partner Velthus. We stayed awake all 3 days, moving from performance to performance, drunk on discovery and connection. I never told him. She stopped. What didn't you tell him? Chen asked gently. That I loved him. Not just as a colleague but... Isahn's 6 fingers twisted together. The Veltrum were not a romantic species by your standards. We bonded through intellectual partnership, through shared pursuit of truth. But what I felt for Velthus was more than that. And I never found the words. The observation deck fell silent except for the distant hum of the station's life support systems. "I'm sorry," Webb said finally, "that you didn't get to tell him." "I'm sorry he didn't get to know," Park added. Isahn looked at them, these humans who apologized for personal griefs as readily as they did for cosmic tragedies. "Why does it matter to you? Individual love stories, personal regrets? You came for the mathematics, the culture, the knowledge." "No," Chin said firmly. "We came for you. All of it. The grand and the small, the public and the private. Because civilizations aren't just their achievements, Dr. Isahn. They're the quiet moments between them. The love confessed and unconfessed. The morning routines and inside jokes and private sorrows." She stood and walked to the viewport, gesturing at the stars beyond. "The Assembly remembers the Veltruum as mathematicians and scholars. That's accurate but incomplete. We want to remember you as people. Beings who loved and doubted and celebrated and grieved. Who made mistakes and told jokes and stayed up too late working on problems that fascinated them. The human who discovered penicillin nearly threw it away," Webb said. "He thought his petri dishes were contaminated. It was the most important medical discovery of our 20th century, and it almost ended up in the trash because one man was having a bad day and wasn't paying attention." Park laughed. "And Mozart allegedly composed some of his greatest symphonies while dealing with money problems and family drama. Beethoven wrote transcendent music while going deaf and being generally grumpy about it. Humanity's greatest achievements came from flawed, complicated, real people," Chin continued. "We figure the same was true for the Veltruum. So yes, we want to know about the recursive convergence problem you just solved. But we also want to know about Velthus and morning chimes, and whatever stupid argument you had with your sibling analog when you were young." Isahn felt something break open in her chest, something that had been rigid with grief, now softening into something more complex. "We argued about notation," she said, and surprised herself by almost laughing. "My clutch sibling Red Hannah insisted that geometric proofs should use curved brackets while I preferred angular ones. We didn't speak for 2 years over it." "That's perfect," Park said, grinning. "That's so beautifully, perfectly petty." "It was," Isahn agreed, and this time she did laugh, a chittering sound the humans had never heard before. "We reconciled at a conference where someone presented a proof using both notation styles just to spite everyone. Red Hannah and I looked at each other across the lecture hall and just couldn't maintain the grudge anymore." "What happened to Red Hannah?" Webb asked quietly. The laughter died. "The plague. She was in the capital when it started. She sent me one final message, just 4 words. Your brackets were adequate." Tears appeared in Park's eyes again. Chen's jaw tightened. Webb looked away, swallowing hard. "We'll remember her too," Chin said. "Red Hannah the stubborn, who made her peace through mathematics and grudging compliments. She'll be in the archive." Over the next 2 days the archive grew. Park composed a piece called Morning Chimes at Silenthia that made Isahn's crest flutter with recognition even though the instruments were entirely human. Webb created detailed visualizations of Veltruum's cities, gardens, and gathering spaces based on Isahn's descriptions. Chin wove it all together into a narrative that was part documentary, part love letter, part promise. On the 6th day, as the humans prepared to depart, Isahn stood in the docking bay with the completed archive held carefully in her hands. It was small, hardly larger than her palm, but it contained multitudes. The weight of her entire civilization, preserved not in cold data but in warm memory. "What will you do with it?" she asked. "First we'll bring it home," Chin said. "Earth. We'll share it with our universities, our artists, our children. Within a year, there will be human musicians performing Veltruum-inspired compositions. Human mathematicians studying your people's proofs. Human poets writing verses about morning chimes they've never heard. And we'll send copies to the other memory keeper ships," Webb added. "Humanity has 12 of them now, scattered across known space. Even if Earth fell tomorrow, your people's story would survive in a dozen other locations. But more than that," Park said, stepping forward to take Isahn's hands, "we'd like your permission to do something else." "What?" Isahn asked. "We'd like to invite you to Earth. Not to live. If you prefer the station, you're welcome to stay. But to visit. To see how human children react to Veltruum mathematics. To hear the music inspired by your morning chimes. To watch your culture take root in soil that isn't your own but treasures you nonetheless." Isahn's crest rose fully, trembling. I would be alone there too. The only Veltruum among billions of humans." "Maybe," Chin said softly. Or maybe you'd be the first Veltrum to find that family isn't only about biology. That belonging isn't only about species. She smiled. We can't replace what you lost, Dr. Isahn. Nothing can. But we can offer you something new. Not as substitution, but as addition. You wouldn't be joining humanity, Webb clarified. You'd be bringing the Veltrum with you. Teaching us, sharing with us, letting your people's voice join the chorus of Earth. Isahn looked at the archive in her hands, then at the 3 humans who had crossed stars to tell her she mattered. Who had solved her mathematical problem not because they were superior but because they saw value in collaboration. Who had spent nearly a week recording every memory she could dredge up, treating her most trivial recollections with the same reverence as her greatest achievements. Velthus would have liked you, she said quietly. He always said the most important discoveries come from unexpected directions. That breakthrough requires someone brave enough to see the problem differently. Then we're honored, Chin said. Isahn made her decision. Yes, I'll come to Earth. Not to forget the Veltrum or to stop being the last of my kind. But to ensure that last doesn't mean forgotten. Park cheered. Webb smiled broadly. Chin simply nodded, respect shining in her eyes. There's one more thing, Isahn said as the humans prepared to board their ship. The recursive convergence problem. My proof. I want to publish it under 2 names. Mine and Velthus's. He would have seen the resonance pattern if he'd lived. He deserved to see it. We'll make sure the attribution is correct, Chin promised. As the wandering star undocked and turned toward the vast dark between here and Earth, Isahn stood at her viewport and watched it go. The loneliness that had defined her existence for 4 years was still there. Grief didn't evaporate simply because someone cared. Velthus was still gone. Red Hannah was still gone. The morning chimes would never ring across Veltruma again. But somewhere on a distant world, human children would soon learn to count using Veltrum number games. Human composers would write music inspired by crystal mountains. Human mathematicians would study proofs carved by beings who died before humanity left their own solar system. The Veltrum hadn't just existed. They had mattered. And now they would echo forward through time, carried not by their own kind but by strange bipeds who understood something profound, that the opposite of extinction wasn't survival. It was remembrance. It was saying to the universe, they were here. They were beautiful. We will not let them be forgotten. Isahn pressed her 6-fingered hand against the viewport, fingers splayed in the Veltrum gesture of gratitude and blessing. In the darkness of space, the wandering star's engines flared like a new constellation. And for the first time in 4 years, Isahn felt something she'd thought lost forever. She felt hope. Not the hope of resurrection, the dead would not return. But the hope that her people's voices, their joy, their quarrels and discoveries and quiet morning moments would sing on. Not alone in her memory but shared. Amplified. Treasured. The last Veltrum. But no longer alone.